today I am going to talk about my favorite subject, CS plus X, but micro niching it down to microbit plus X and all the cool, fun things you could potentially do in your classrooms now that you have this exciting technology in your hands with your students. So as usual, I probably packed way too much into a 30-minute presentation. So I am going to get started and go from there. So I am Dr. Abigail Joseph. I am the Director of Learning, Innovation, and Design at the Harker School in San Jose, California. It's a TK through 12 independent school, and I work in their middle school. So if you are a middle school person, I get you. And the link for the slides is it's very easy. Bit.ly microbit X. And I am also a CSTA Equity Fellow alumni. So part of the first cohort of CST Equity Fellows. And so what I'm going to talk today is really about how can you take this device that you now have good found knowledge of and apply it in a way to your classroom that brings equity and access to your students. There we go. All right, so I'm going to take you on a little journey because I love sharing little journeys. So that's little me in the corner. I don't know how old I was, but probably of a toddler age and always thinking and being inquisitive and thinking about my world and just being very curious about my world. However, as a child of the 80s, I would have to say that in terms for a curious little Black girl, there were not many people for me to look up to in terms of engineering and computer science. I did have my father, who was an electrical engineer by trade. However, when I think about all the things I used to do in my free time when I was kind of a tween, there weren't that many role models. I spent a lot of time playing video games, on my Atari with my brother, looking at the Space Invaders there. I was totally obsessed with this game called King's Quest. I don't know if any of you have ever played it, but it's like one of those adventure games where you have to kind of figure out the lay of the land by typing questions and being curious about what different things are. And then eventually you go on an adventure and by asking questions in the environment. And I used to play that all the time, and not even on this version of it that I found is beautiful color. It was totally on my monochrome machine, and it was just something I loved to do. And I loved the game. War Games was like, I was so intrigued by this this movie and the whole idea of computers being smart and intelligent. But if I show you a little clip of this, and hopefully the sound comes through. Let's see.
It says you're fine. Wait, I accidentally typed bagels.
Built-in Wi-Fi, the most tech-savvy Subaru Forester ever. We're in. It thinks I'm Falcon. Hello.
ask you that?
It'll ask you whatever it's programmed to ask you. You want to hear it talk?
Yeah.
I'll ask it how it feels. I'm fine. How are you?
Excellent. 15 long time. Can you explain the removal of your user account on June 23rd, 1973?
They must have totally died. People sometimes make mistakes.
Yes, they do.
How can I talk?
It's not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
Oh,
I think I missed them.
yeah. Weird, isn't it? Love to.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there. If you have not seen this Blast from the Past movie, War Games, you might want to check it out. Thank you, Vicky. That I watched that movie over and over and over and over again. But if you look in that movie, the two protagonists are white, and that was kind of the story of me growing up, was not having many people that looked like me, and also not knowing how to fit all the ideas in my head into the world around me. Another movie that I watched over and over again, I'm not going to play this clip, but you can watch it when you, is Real Genius. I don't know if there are many of you who have seen that movie, but it was essentially kind of took place on a very, probably a university like MIT, and it was just about actually, I will play you a little clip because this clip is interesting. Hold on. Let's see. Play.
Is your cleanser doing enough for your sensitive skin?
Yes, the Popcorn House and Val Kilmer. I'm glad you are all with me.
And actively hydrates as it cleanses.
If only YouTube was on my side. I'm going to pause it there, but that's the line that I wanted you to hear. You can use your mind creatively. And this idea of combining computer science with other things is just a way to open up the world that I didn't have as a child to you and your students. No, don't do that. There we go. All right.
I was just like,
moving on. So if you really knew me, so that's a little bit about my childhood, but if you knew me, I am a person who loves to look at, apply my passions to a lot of different areas. So I love to paint, I love to dance, I love to take photography. I love to figure out new things. In this corner, you'll see a dinosaur I just learned how to felt. I never knew how to do that. And I love being a middle school teacher because I get to be silly and dress up on Halloween and no one think the difference of it. And so I want to talk to you today about some ways that you can apply this microbit to different worlds so that you can engage this tool with your students in a way that they will, it applies to them and their world. So when we talk about access to CS, that is one way that we can engage our students, is by providing them avenues to look into their world versus us telling them how to interpret their world. So this morning we spent a lot of time looking at different ways that we can use the microbit, different lessons that you could possibly provide, but I want to provide you with a context for which you can provide a container in which your students can set their imaginations wild. So that is what we are going to talk about. So in the chat, look at this picture. Some of you might have seen it before if you've seen part of this talk somewhere else. But in the chat, write down, what do you see? What do you think? And what does this make you wonder? What questions do you have? So you can answer any one of those three in the chat. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? So Emily sees bright colors. See a lot of people. CS everywhere, dancers using technology. I wonder how CS is changing shoes. Some notion of sustainability with the energy. Jason wonders how much isn't being shown. There's gender and diversity. There are people who aren't white, which is great. A range of careers. Lovely. And so computer science is everywhere. And it's in everything that we do. And so why not give our students the opportunity to connect computer science to their lives in this way? So the next slide is a video, this video that code.org put out that talks about how CS is changing the world. I'm going to summarize that so that we can have more discussion about the different ideas I'm going to put forth. But if you haven't seen this video, you can go to it in the slides. And it basically talks about how, just as you all said, that CS is everywhere. It is permeating every single aspect of our future world. And our students are going to be part of that future world. And no matter what their passion, no matter what they're drawn to, their CS is going to be a part of their life. So we need to engage them in a way that is going to keep them interested in computer science, much like the students this morning talked about their hackathon experience and creating this forum for students who may be a little shy about learning computer science because they don't think it is for them. All right, so I see from that code.org CS is everywhere video, or just the picture, the thumbnail for the video, I see a world of problems waiting to be solved. And with our microbit, we can employ the engineering design process in our classrooms to engage our students with the problems in the world. And there are many questions to be asked. And if we start off with the questions, the answers will follow. And so really what I'm going to implore you is to start thinking about what are the questions in this world that your students can connect to, and what are the questions in this world that they can solve. So we're going to talk about the microbit plus X, design problems. What questions can we ask that would open a world of imagination and creativity? All right, so the first subject to talk about is how might we build a better book? This is a great question. Former First Lady went into classrooms reading books to students, right? But how could we take this idea of the storybook and make stories come to life? So to simplify the design engineering process, I'm going to say that if you start off with a spark with discussion and conversation with your students, and giving them some opportunities to think about a subject matter, they can then identify a problem with a question for themselves to solve. So let's take this idea of how might we make stories come to life. So in the chat, can you tell me how do we tell stories? What are some of the many ways that we tell stories? Through songs, sound effects, we talk them, we can dance them, we can tell it with props, with pictures, with puppets, so many different ways. Oh, I miss art with art. I'll have to catch up art with art another time. Yes, so many ways that we can tell a story, right? So there is this video that I linked here, links to it's a makey workshop that involved the University of Colorado Boulder, and they have a program called Build a Better Book. Now this program is more designed, they design books for visually impaired students. However, this idea of just how can you take your average storybook and make it more exciting or engaging. So the next step, once you've had a kind of conversation around that, you can move to having your students identify a problem. So you might give them this overarching question of how might we make stories come to life? And they might come up with, you brainstorm a list of other questions they might want to try and solve. So one example I have is, how might we enhance a storybook? Another question might be, how might I create a funny storybook to cheer up my sick cousin? So through a little bit of conversation, and you know your students best, each student can come up with their own unique problem to solve that is unique to them and their situation and their family. You don't have to tell them, we are going to create this particular project today. This is the question that they're going to pose. And then what you can do as their guide in this process is limit how they go about the solutions and prototyping solutions to this problem question that they've come up with. So that's where the setting criteria, constraints, and prototyping comes in. So an example of one criteria constraint that is really important that I think we all always have is time. So how much time are you willing to provide students? If you give students weeks and weeks and weeks, we all could work on a project for weeks and weeks and end, but that's not the reality of what we do. What I like to say to my students when it comes to engaging in projects, engineers usually, the two things they have is either constraints they have are time or money. So we're not dealing with money, but that would be nice. But we are dealing with time. So if you want to constrain the time to 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 class periods, whatever that time is, that's like one of the constraints you can put on the project. You could also add in constraints of maybe your book could only have 2 interactions and be interactive in 2 different ways. Or maybe one of the constraints is criteria is that you have to do at least 1 page in the storybook that has some interactions to it. So the criteria and constraints are where you get to guide the process, and then everything else is open to the student imagination. So this is one area that you could add the microbit to. Oops. Next page. Next page. There we go. All right. So how might we improve travel experiences? Everyone has some type of travel experience. So if you're in a school like me, a high-performing private school with a lot of high socioeconomic children, if I ask the question of where do you like to travel or where have you traveled, I will get things like, my favorite place to go is Spain or Rome and whatever. So we want to design questions to spark discussion that are inclusive. So we could start off with just defining what is travel? How do people travel? How do people get around? What does it mean to travel? Travel could be walking to school. Travel can be walking to the store. What's fun about travel? Well, I really enjoy travel because I get to hang out with my family. What's challenging about travel? Maybe when I travel to school, I have concerns about safety because I might have to walk to school in a not so safe area. So by opening up these discussions to your students, they can really engage with, you can get to know them more, which is what we want. And then they also will feel attached to the project themselves and be able to bring themselves and their identity to what they are creating. And then you can also spark discussion with some videos. So in here, I have an awesome video about, if you want to talk about algorithms, this video on Google Translate is a great video to talk about just generating algorithms, but it also can generate discussions about, so if you're going to a place you've never been to before, what might be some problems that you might encounter? And then there is this video about self-driving cars, which talks about how these cars, actually this video is great because this person actually hops into a self-driving car and you go through a whole experience. And there might be questions that come up just about self-driving cars that you can then move over to the identifying a problem with a question. So how might we make a tool to remind someone to journal about a trip? Like when I travel, I want to journal about places that I've been and stuff, but I always forget. So maybe I can develop some system to help remind me to do that. Or maybe if I'm that student who thinks that sometimes travel or walking around in strange places is a danger, then maybe my question is, how might we inform people when we are in danger? And then again, you can set the criteria constraints for their prototyping session. It could be the materials that you want allow them to use. It could just be limiting them to certain sensors on the microbit. It could be, again, the idea of time as well. So that is another place where the criteria and constraints are something that you as a teacher can bring in. And then allow them that time to take their question and just see where their imagination takes them. So how might we light up the world? When we are talking about CS is everywhere, people may have seen the dancers with the lights on their clothing. So this is a great one to spark imagination, especially in combining it with the microbit. And you can start off the discussion with, where do we see light? What do we use light for? How is light a part of our day-to-day lives? Create a conversation about like just observing our world and how light is utilized in our world, which will lead to many more questions. And so a problem question that might arise might be, how might we incorporate more lights in our life? Maybe I feel like my life is very dark and I might want to incorporate more lights in our life. Or maybe I might come up with a question of, how might we create how might I create a night light for my baby brother so that he's not afraid to go to sleep at night? So all of these questions, again, it takes a little conversation with your students, but they will all be able to come up with some question that they can then proceed to answer by prototyping with the microbit and coming up with a solution to their problem. And so again, there's criteria and constraints that you can set for their prototype. So let's take this as for instance, In the chat, can you all think of any criteria constraints that you could set up for this particular project of how might we light up the world? What might be a criteria constraint that you would give your students? All right, so it needs to float and come on after dark. I like it. I was thinking that one criteria could be that it needs to have at least one light sequence. So a sequence of lights, how the lights work. It needs to be powered by solar energy. Great. It only uses renewable energy. So these are all constraints you can put on just to make it so that the projects don't get too voluminous. But you can also leave it open and see what they come up with. Sometimes leaving a project really wide open, students come up with things that you will not even have ever imagined. Yes, I love that art, the idea of light and light pollution and exploring that. And again, through the conversations that the spark with discussion conversations you have, all of these other things are gonna probably come up in which you can help focus and guide students to come up with a particular problem that they're excited to investigate more and come up with a solution for themselves. I think I have one more section, which is how might we help our community? And this is huge, but again, it can be constrained, or you can leave it huge. I think the beauty of having it be a big topic where the students find their own question within the topic is that then they are connected to it through their identity and what they know versus through the lens of you as teacher and what you, the expectations that you are setting upon them. So for community, there's so many questions that one could ask about community, but I would start off with asking them, what is community? Who makes up your community? Thinking about what are some problems that your community is facing. A great video spark is this book, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but William Kamkwamba, he came up with a solution in his small village in Africa out of the constraint of there being a drought and their community could not farm their food because they could not get water. And he created this windmill out of spare parts that he got from a junkyard, and created a windmill that generated not only energy, but brought water to his village so that they could continue to irrigate and farm. So, and this book, it's got a YA version for older readers, but it also has a children's book version of it as well. So the videos I've left in here, one is a read along of the children's book. The second is he does a short TED Talk about his experience of building this machine. And then all of a sudden, all these people got wind of it. And all of a sudden he was flying on his first plane ride. And all of a sudden he was spending the night in his first hotel room. And it's a really lovely TED Talk. And then there also was a movie made out of it, which I have not seen yet, but this is the trailer to the movie that I believe was released on Netflix about his story. So many entry points for sparking conversation. And then again, identifying a problem or a question, and I did not, I copied the question, but I did not update the question. So a question that you might ask is, how might we grow our own food? Might be a good question for community. And again, all those questions that the students come up with will relate back to the discussion that you have with them beforehand about what is community, what are some problems in the community, maybe showing them one of these videos, and then setting the criteria and constraints again, for which can be just about anything that you want to put on there. Maybe you ask them, what are some criteria and constraints that they think we should have for this particular project? And I'm sure they would have a lot of answers as well. And so to close it out, I just want to reconnect back to our theme for this hackathon, which is the Do Your Bit, the global goals. And I put some links. I put the link to the Do Your Bit on the microbit site, and the section where it introduces the global goals. But I also put a link to the global goals themselves, because that site is really cool. If you've never visited it, it has a bunch of resources. So if you want to think more open-ended projects, as opposed to going through the microbit projects lesson by lesson, as they have it defined on the, now I forget what it's called, Make Your Bit. When you go to the global goals, when you click on the various tiles, it gives you actions you can take. It gives you information on how to explore this action in more detail. You might find some stories. So this is a great place to find sparks for different conversations that you want to have with your students, as well as thinking about, so I know the Do Your Bit is about climate action, goal 13, but maybe your students aren't into climate and green and sustainability. Maybe you know your class and your students, maybe they might be more interested in doing some things around the idea of hunger, or maybe they want to think more about poverty. So just know that you can go to the main global goals site to learn more. And yes, I have reached the end of what I wanted to share with all of you. But if you have any questions or want to connect with me on anything, you can find me. I go back to the beginning with all my contact information.
To go from a unique project that
so yes, thank you all for coming and learning. And yes, take the slides again, bit.ly microbitx. Go watch the videos, use them to spark some really cool engineering ideas in your classroom, that your students can come up with their own problems and solutions to. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone's created.